So, now we will be considering the teachings proper of Krishnamurti. We have been going through so much of history, and maybe it is relevant, may not be relevant. I mean, it is up to each one of us to find out how relevant it was to him or her. So, in 1980, Krishnamurti asked Mary Latens as to what she thought as the core of his teaching. So, whatever Krishnamurti had talked about, that is considered as his teaching, and then he asked Mary Latens what did she think as the core of his teaching. What is the core of his teaching? He asked Mary Latens to write about it. So she wrote and gave it to Krishnaji for corrections or modifications. And according to Mary Latens, except for the word core, Krishnamurti changed everything. He changed everything, and so it was Krishnamurti who wrote what was the core of his teaching. Yeah. And that document is there in the archives, the original one. I think it was 21st October 1980. That is the date of that document when Krishnamurti wrote. So that contains more or less essentially what he talked about, but one of the important aspect of his teaching is not covered in that. I mean, the meditation. He doesn't talk about meditation in that core of the teaching. So he also doesn't talk about the religious life, what he meant by religion, and that he doesn't talk about in core of the teaching. So probably if we understand the core, we may naturally come upon these two things also. So maybe he didn't find it necessary to talk about them in the core. So what he says that the core of his teaching begins with that statement which he made in 1929, that truth is a pathless land and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever. And it says truth being limitless, something living, you cannot have any path to it, and so on. Of course, there is the full version of that talk also, which was mostly the talk which he gave when he dissolved that order of the star. So that we have considered in the last session. Then there was an abridged version of that talk, which was prepared by him only and which was published. It was just one page or one folio publication and titled as Pathless Reality. That was the title given to that document. And then in 1930 itself, it was filmed. Krishnamurti reading that abridged version of the talk, Truth is a Pathless Land. He is reading it, and that thing was filmed. It's a black and white film. Krishnamurti looks very, very handsome, young, and he is reading that talk. So that recording is also available on YouTube. If you are interested, you can see it. And so that is about that pathless reality. So, the core of the teaching begins with mention of that statement that truth is a pathless land, and you cannot approach it by any path. And he explains why you can't have a path to truth. Because truth is something living, something moving. And something which is living, something moving, you cannot have path to it. Because by the time you have constructed your path, the thing has already moved. And therefore, again you have to construct another path, and by that time again it has moved. And so that way you can never reach truth. And therefore, you can't have path to truth. And another interpretation, not given in that statement, but elsewhere, when Krishnaji talks about truth as a completely different dimension. So, which means that we live in certain dimension and truth is in a completely different dimension. So, in the last session I gave an example that if this floor is the dimension in which we live, and truth is not in the dimension of the floor, but it is somewhere here in a completely different dimension, then you can build as many paths as you want in the floor. You cannot reach here by following any of those paths. And therefore, there is no path possible to truth. And then he says that it is not truth which comes down, it cannot be brought down, but you have to raise yourself to truth. You cannot bring down the truth. And he says that just as you cannot bring the mountain top to the valley, but you have to climb if you want to see the mountain top or reach there, you have to climb all the steep path, whatever, and then you see the mountain top. So, similarly he says you cannot bring down the truth and make it palatable or easier for others or for you, but you have to rise up to the level of truth, then only you can meet truth. And that is so. In fact, there is another interpretation, right? If you take the world teacher as the truth, then world teacher cannot descend below the Buddhic plane. So, Buddhic plane is the lowest he can descend. And if you want to meet the truth, that is the world teacher, then you have to ascend to the Buddhic level. You cannot bring him down. And therefore, in that way also, it validates that statement that you cannot bring down the truth, but you have to ascend to the level of truth. And then he says that how is one to do that? How do you ascend to truth? So he says the approach to truth is through your own life. It is not outside your life. So, leaving your homes, leaving society, going to the forest, living in a cave and trying to search for truth, he says, is in vain. You can never find truth that way. Because even if you go to forest, you are carrying all your psychological baggage with you to the forest also. And so only the location has changed, but the psychological environment or psychological state is the same, and therefore doesn't make any difference. So the truth is to be approached through your own life. And what is my life, if I ask that question? then my life is my interaction with the environment around me. I am constantly interacting with the environment. So, environment does not mean only the trees, plants and all these things, but environment also means other human beings, the animals, everything that is around me. I interact with them, and that interaction is my life. And therefore, if the approach to truth is through my own life, I have to understand my own life. And in order to understand, I have to learn about it. And in order to learn, I have to observe myself. Without observing, learning is not possible. In any case, if you are given something and you are asked to learn about it without asking anybody, then how do you learn? You observe it, you play with it, you experiment with it, and through that you come to know about it, what it is, and so on. So, there was an interesting experiment that was done by some people. They had lots of iPads, and they dropped a box filled with iPads completely in working condition, and they provided the internet connection also, so that the iPad is fully functional. And then they just dropped that box in some village in Africa, and children in that village playing, they saw that box, they opened it, they found this iPad. They didn't know that it was iPad or all this or that. They just started playing with it, doing things and all those things. And it was found that in 6 months' time, they were expert in using the iPad without anybody teaching them how to use it and what was it and so on. So, which means that learning through observation. You can learn through observation about anything. You have to experiment with, you have to play with it, and then you learn. And that is how these kids, they learn about all the gadgets. They hardly ask anybody. In fact, we have to ask them how to do this and how to do that. So, if we want to learn about our life, about ourselves, right, we have to observe ourselves. And in order to observe ourselves, we can observe ourselves only in the mirror of relationship. We are related to the rest of humanity, to the environment, and in that relationship, we are visible exactly as we are. And therefore, if you want to observe yourself, you have to observe yourself in the mirror of that relationship. And you learn about yourself. Now, when you start observing yourself in the mirror of relationship, you find that you have gathered lots of images in you, all kinds of images about all kinds of things. And why are you holding on to those images? Because you feel secured with those images. So, those images are our shelter. We hide behind them. Some of the images are pretentious. I mean, you must have observed that during interaction, right, some of the images we show outside are quite different than what we are actually inside. So, they say that the elephant has two kinds of teeth. One set is to show and other set is to eat or bite. So, all those images we have gathered, stored in ourselves, and we have to understand those images. Those images are the content of our consciousness. We are conscious through those images about ourselves. Right? If you are completely absorbed in something, you are not conscious of yourself. It's only when a reaction arises, a certain content is stimulated and a corresponding emotion arises, then you are conscious of yourself. Then you say, yes, I am feeling this, I am feeling that, or I am afraid, or I am angry, or whatever it is. So, the content of consciousness is made up of all these images. Then the question arises, what is this content of consciousness? In the sense, what is consciousness? And usually we feel that my consciousness is separate from the other person's consciousness. My consciousness is my own private space, and other person's consciousness is his or her private space. And each one is completely free to be what he or she is in that private space. But is it so? Are these two individual consciousness completely separate as watertight compartments? That is, nothing can move from one to other. So it is not so. I mean, the content of consciousness keeps on changing. Some of the content is thrown out, some of the new content is added, depends on our interactions. In certain interaction, if I react in certain way, then more content corresponding to that reaction gets added to my consciousness. And if I don't react, or some of the content is not used at all, then that goes out of my consciousness. But it is just like in mathematics, certain things you don't use at all, you only learned them when you were in the school or college, and later on they had no use in your life. So they go out of your consciousness, you don't remember them even what they were and so on. So like that, the content of consciousness keeps on exchanging. Something goes out, something comes in, but whatever that goes out, where does it go? So there is what is called as the totality of consciousness. The totality of consciousness is not the sum total of individual consciousness. It is much larger than that. And the individual consciousness is part of that totality of consciousness. The content of individual consciousness are drawn from the totality of consciousness. And so, in that way, the source of my content of consciousness and the source of anybody else's content of consciousness is the same, which is the totality of consciousness. And the same content is shared, is taken as myself. Because after all, what is my identity? My identity is based on my body, my thoughts, my content of consciousness, my experience, whatever that I hold on to, whatever is within me, including this body, is my identity. But if the content of consciousness is not permanent, not fixed, it is changing, because today I am this, but tomorrow I may not be this, I may be that. Today I respond in a certain way, tomorrow I may respond in a different way. So that identity is not permanent, not definite, changing, right? So then, can it be considered as identity at all? can it be considered as uniqueness at all? Then I am not unique, because I share the same consciousness with everybody else. And if I am sharing the same consciousness with everybody else, I cannot say that I am unique. I am different from other human being. And therefore, Krishnaji says that all human beings, wherever they may be living, in whatever part of the world, psychologically they are the same. There is no difference. And therefore, the uniqueness of a human being doesn't lie in consciousness. And if you say each human being is unique, and if it is not in terms of the content of consciousness, then in what sense a human being can be called as unique? Right? Now that Krishnaji doesn't talk about in that core of the teaching, but maybe later on in some session we will consider it, that where does the uniqueness of a human being lie, I mean where one can look for it, if not in the content of consciousness. So, the human being is not unique as long as he is living the life of the content of consciousness. Then Krishnaji talks about thought in that core of the teachings from consciousness, because it's a logical, you can say, strain, because he says that the content of consciousness is put together by thought. So if it is put together by thought, then we have to understand what is thought. And so he starts talking about thought in that core of the teaching. And then he says how thought is limited. And he talks about time. And he says that thought and time are the same. But is it so for us? I mean, our experience, we regard thought as different than time. But in what way thought is same as time? Now the origin of thought and time is the same. Both are based on memory. Krishnaji says thought is the response of memory. When the memory responds to an input, that response is the thought. And how time comes from the source of memory, or how memory is the source of time. In order to measure time, you have to have a reference point, right? Time is actually a duration between two events. One event happens, another event happens, and the duration between those two events is the time, right? But suppose out of those two events, you were present only in the second event. You don't know anything about the first event, you are not there. Then can you talk about time? Can't. Because you just don't have any knowledge or any clue as to the first event. So, which means that unless the first event leaves some kind of record, some kind of residue, from which you can gather that yes, first event had happened and this residue is this much old, and therefore the duration between the first event and second event is this much. So that residue is the memory, because got recorded that change. So that is the memory. And so based on that memory is the concept of time. Then you can measure time, okay, from this event to that event is the time. So therefore they have taken, say, the time of or date of birth of Christ as the reference point, and with respect to that they have measured, and therefore we say that this is 2025. So 2025 years after the birth of Christ. In Hindu calendar they have taken some other reference point. There are in fact two reference points, Vikram Samvat and Shalivahan Shak, and with respect to those points then we measure time and say that so many years have passed and so on. So time also arises from memory. So you have thought and you have time, both have the same source as the memory, and therefore they are similar. At least that much one can accept, that they are similar, they come from the same source, right? But Krishnaji says they are the same, not similar. Thought is time and time is thought, he says. So to understand that, without thought, do you have the sense of time? I mean, that is to be observed. If there is no thought, is there a sense of time? And Krishnaji says, without thought there is no sense of time. It's the thought which creates the sense of time. And that sense of time is actually a psychological time, in the sense that if there is something very boring, you can say work you are doing, and you do it for 5 minutes, you feel you have done it for a long time, right? You are eager when that work will finish. But if you are doing some interesting work, you do it for hours, and yet you feel that, oh, it got over very soon. So the sense of time there, which is completely based on thought, right? Then the duration, there is no definite duration. The duration will depend on how thought feels about it, and therefore it could be quite illusory. And so he says the thought is time, and then he says that no psychological change can be brought about through time. Of course, there is what is called as psychological becoming. I mean, if you observe yourself, you will find that you are always trying to become something, psychologically or otherwise. And trying to become something psychologically, actually you are not becoming anything, but you only feel that you are becoming like that. And for example, you say that you are a very short-tempered person and you want to become a quiet person, and therefore you set up a process of becoming a quiet person, and in that process you feel that you are becoming quieter and quieter, and in fact you see that your responses are not as violent as they used to be, and you take things without showing much reaction, all this thing, and you are happy that yes, your process is working and you are becoming more and more quiet. But at certain point of time, there is such a severe provocation that you burst out with anger. So, if you had progressively quietened down, I mean, this burst of anger should have been impossible. But since you have burst out of anger, which means that you are not actually quietening down. It was just that you are controlling yourself not to react in that way or that intensely. That's all. But the anger was not getting reduced, was not decreasing, or I was not becoming quieter and all those things. And therefore, this process of psychologically becoming different or something is an illusion. It is illusion because it appears to you that you are becoming something, and actually you are not becoming anything. You are just being what you are. And the nature of illusion is taking thing for what it is not, assuming things for what they are not. So, here you are assuming that you are becoming something, and actually you are not becoming anything. You are just being what you are, and therefore the becoming is an illusion. And if that is the illusion, that means you cannot change yourself psychologically in time. Time is not a factor to bring about a psychological change. And therefore, he says there that therefore there is no psychological evolution. There is no such thing as psychological evolution. And he defines evolution as a gradual change taking place over a long period of time. And he says that if psychological revolution was a reality, the human beings would have changed psychologically by now. But it seems they have not changed. Whatever was there, whatever they were psychologically millions of years ago, they are the same now also. They have not changed, and therefore they will continue in the same way for next million years without changing. And therefore there is no such thing as psychological evolution. So unless you change yourself, you are not going to change in time. But of course, with this artificial intelligence and all these things, Krishnamurti, in view of that, he made another very interesting statement. He said that if you don't change yourself from inside, they will change you from outside. So that's a very interesting statement, which he made later on when he was talking about computers, artificial intelligence and so on. So there he says there is no psychological evolution at all. Right? Then from that, observing the content of consciousness, understanding the limitation of thought, understanding the limitation of time, understanding that there is no such thing as psychological evolution, right? And with all that understanding, you now observe yourself, the content of your consciousness, right? And there he says that when you observe the content of your consciousness, you feel that you as an observer is different from that which you are observing. So there is this division you feel or you experience. So it's not only the observation, it says about the experience also. You as the experiencer, you feel that you are separate from that which you are experiencing, and so on. So he says that, but that is an illusion. observer is different from observed is an illusion. Now he says that, but for us it is not an illusion. We feel that yes, we are separate. I am different from my anger. And in fact, many times the argument is given that, well, the anger has come, anger has gone, but I am still there. So I am not anger. I am different from anger. Right? But he says that no, the observer is the observed. And he says that is the fundamental division, the psychological division that exists in us. And that is actually the cause of the divisive nature of thought. And that is also the cause of all the conflict that human beings go through. So, observer is the observed. He says that with the realization of that means when you are able to see that observer is different from observed is an illusion, right? Then there is no observer separate from the observed. And that, he says, leads to an insight. The very realization that observer is the observed leads to an insight which makes the mutation of the brain possible. So, the mutation of the brain is the insight into this statement that observer is the observed, the realization of that statement, not the intellectual acceptance. And he has also talked about freedom in that core of the teachings. And he says that human beings, they consider themselves as free, but they are not actually free. And their notion of freedom is based on choice. If they are able to choose on their own accord, they feel they are free. If somebody else tells them what to choose, then they feel that they are not free. But even accepting that, he says that even if you have freedom to choose, if you are able to choose on your own accord, right, what is the basis of your choice? So, out of 10 alternatives, if you have chosen a particular alternative, what is the basis of choosing that particular alternative? On what basis you have decided that this is your choice? So, the basis is the content of your consciousness. The basis is your background. The basis is your conditioning, right? And on that basis, you are going to make your choice. So, given the conditioning, the choice is fixed, right? So, if the choice is fixed, then where is the freedom? Anybody who knows your conditioning, he can tell what you are going to choose. And therefore, you are not free to choose even on your own accord, because your own accord is guided, controlled by that conditioning. And so, freedom for us means freedom to live as per my conditioning. Nobody else should dictate me how I should live. I should be completely free to live as per my conditioning, whatever it may be. And he says that's only a relative freedom because the conditioning can change. Conditioning could be exploited. Because a person who can read your conditioning, right, then he can devise a situation which will force you to respond in a certain way. And therefore, all the external agencies, they will be busy in creating different situations for you, in which you will keep on responding according to their expectations, according to their wishes. So a company wants you to buy certain product. They know your background, so they create a situation or they create an ad, and your response to that will be you buy that product. They want your vote, so they will create a situation, they will paint a picture knowing your conditioning, and you will vote as per that. So this kind of thing, that means this can extend to any length in such a way that you will be completely controlled by the outside. What you think, what you do, how you feel, everything is controlled from outside. And then where is the freedom? So there is no freedom in the field of consciousness. It's only a relative freedom, but the absolute freedom not possible. And as long as you have a content of consciousness, there is no possibility of this freedom. So human beings living a life of the content of consciousness, therefore they are not free. Is there a possibility for such human beings to be absolutely free? I mean, from whatever has been described, from that what we gather is that we are absolutely not free as human beings. We are all conditioned. Our life is all controlled. But then, for such human beings, is there a possibility of that absolute freedom? And if it is there, where does it lie? Where is it? So that's where he says that the only freedom the human beings have is the freedom to observe, the freedom to be aware. That's the only freedom. There is no other freedom. Initially, even that observation will be controlled by the content of consciousness. It will dictate what you should observe or what you should think and all those things. But even that can be observed. And therefore, the freedom lies only in the observation, only in that awareness, the choiceless awareness. That's the only freedom. And the moment you are able to observe without separating the observer, then you are already free. And it is the free mind which can understand life as a whole, not in fragments, but as a whole. And therefore, then the right response to whatever that is happening. And then he talks about negation in that core of the teaching. And negation seems to be a very important aspect of Krishnaji's teachings. And I don't know, but some people say that even in Vedanta, why saying neti neti is actually the approach of negation. Well, but we have to understand what negation means. And in fact, he says that negation is the only positive action. Otherwise, all actions are only reactions, reactions of the content of consciousness. But negation is the only positive action. true action. Now, where is the need for such an action? Because we won't do any action without any necessity, without any need. So, where is such action required? Why the action of negation required? So, it is required to find out what is love, what is compassion, what is that intelligence. In order to find that out, the negation is the only approach. Any positive approach will only land you in the ideas about it. If you start defining what love is, then that definition is only an idea which you consider as law, and actually it is not law. How to find out actually what is law? You have to negate everything which you mistaken as love. Right? So, what does negation mean then? Like say Krishnamurti says, attachment is not love. So, negate attachment. Now, what does negating attachment mean? Just to accept and say that yes, I agree that attachment is not love. And then you agree with all such statements of Krishnaji that memory is not love, emotion is not love, desire is not love, and you can agree with a long list of what is not love. So, after doing that, have you got love? You will find that you haven't got love, because you have merely agreed with Krishnamurti that yes, these things are not law, and mere agreement doesn't lead you anywhere, because whatever you agree with today, tomorrow you are free to disagree. Particularly the people who have fallen in love, they will completely disagree that love is not memory or love is not attachment and so on. They will completely disagree. So, what does negation mean? When you say love is not attachment, then the negation of attachment means the complete ending of all attachment, which means that you are never attached again. So, now do you see what kind of work is involved in negation? When you have to be completely free of all attachment. Right? Now, how does one get free from all attachment? So, again, the freedom is possible only through understanding. That is the basic statement. And so, you have to understand the whole nature of attachment, why you get attached, what is its nature, what happens when you are attached, all those things. And when you have understood the attachment completely, then it is gone. You are free of it. And that needs quite a lot of observation, because in your interaction, in your relationship, you have to watch how attachment is working, how it is working through you, what you are doing, how your decisions are based on attachment, and so on, how you deviate from the logical decision to a decision based on attachment, and so on. And that is really quite a work. I mean, it's not just the matter of agreement. And that is so with every other thing, every other factor which has to be negated. If love is not memory, if love is not desire, then you have to understand how desire functions in your life and be free of it, and so on. And so, he says only with negation the positive is born, or positive is possible. So, when all the things which are not love are negated, then there is love. And he says, without love, life is like a desert, a dry land, not worth living. And with love goes all the other qualities like beauty, freedom, intelligence. Normally, people say that love is blind. And here Krishnaji says that love has its own intelligence. So, which is correct? So, it is not the love which is blind, it is the attachment which is blind. Attachment doesn't have any intelligence. It's the love which has intelligence. And so, that's where the core of the teaching ends. These are the things he has talked about in that document. He has not touched upon meditation and religion in that, which are also very important aspects of his teaching. But we may consider them in our, we still have 3 more sessions, so we'll consider them in that. So now the session is open for questions and answers.
One clarification about what is the difference between communication and explanation of the teachings? Yeah, is it correct if I say Krishnaji is communicating love, compassion and truth,
Yes.
and explaining the content of consciousness to human beings? Why I am more interested in explaining the teachings rather than living the teachings?
Yes.
Please kindly communicate.
So, am I merely explaining the teaching? If I am merely explaining the teaching, which means that I have taken a position of one who knows, and the other I am pushing him to a position of one who doesn't know. And then I am explaining what I know, right? So, Krishnaji would call it as imposing my ignorance on others. So, because Krishnaji says that the teacher is one who dispels the darkness, who dispels the ignorance, and not the one who imposes his ignorance on the other, right? So, if that is the position, then yes, then it is the imposing one's ignorance on others. But if I am not explaining, right, I am myself investigating, I am myself watching, observing, trying to learn afresh. I may have said same things before, or I may be saying different things today, but I am not saying or repeating it from memory. I am looking at it afresh and trying to find out what it means to me at that time. And out of that, then I try to communicate or try to explain. And then it becomes something which is living, something which is alive, and not just a mechanical repetition of what I have been saying. Because I think I am giving these kinds of speeches for last more than 25 years, and more or less I am speaking on the same topics, responding to similar questions, but I never feel that I am repeating. Every question I take it afresh, watch my response, what it is, try to understand, try to grasp it, and then based on my understanding at that moment, I respond. and somehow that response goes well, gets communicated with the audience, and when it gets communicated, then the audience also participates at the psychological level. And you may not be actually talking, but as you are listening and making attempts to follow or understand whatever that is being said, right? Now that activity is your participation in what is going on in these sessions, and that participation makes the session more alive. So probably sitting in the privacy of my room, exploring alone what Krishnamurti has talked and all these things, maybe I might come to some little understanding of what he is saying. But here in a group where each one is exploring and trying to understand what Krishnamurti means, that creates a much larger momentum. And the group as a whole comes to some understanding of the teaching. It's not each individual understanding it separately, but the group as a whole comes to some understanding which is shared by each participant. So it is not my understanding or your understanding, it is the understanding of the group as a whole. And that is actually the beauty of the dialogue. Why dialogue is such an important aspect of Krishnaji's teaching, or the dialogue as one of the important ways of learning, because in dialogue this possibility exists. It is not the understanding of a particular individual as per his particular conditioning, but the effect of the conditioning gets averaged out in a group like this, and therefore is not of much significance. And whatever understanding the group as a whole comes upon, it is more likely to be correct than an individual, because the individual understanding will be highly likely to be biased as per his individual conditioning, while here the conditioning is getting averaged out, and when it gets averaged out, the effect of conditioning is reduced considerably. And in that case, whatever understanding you arrive at is more likely to be correct than otherwise. And that is why the importance of these sessions. And if it were mechanical, I don't think I would have been able to continue for last 25 years. I mean, it would have been boring. You must have observed the teachers in the school. We had a physics teacher, so he will just repeat the same thing, batches after batches, batches after batches. He will tell the same jokes, and in the same way students will laugh and it will go on like that mechanically, and how boring. And maybe after 15-20 years the teacher himself is so thoroughly bored, he doesn't want to teach anymore. So that is what happens when you go about it mechanically. But every time when it is new, there is no place for boredom. It's a new discovery, it's a new understanding, it's a new learning, and then the life moves on. So that is the significance of these dialogues. So explanation based on actual understanding, actual observation is fine. I don't think there is anything wrong. Right? And the communication. Now what is it that gets communicated? The psychological aspects gets communicated. If the person is very enthusiastic, that enthusiasm will get communicated. If the person is very much interested, that interest will get communicated. Right? If person is like say person like Krishnamurti, with all the compassion he is explaining, so that compassion will get communicated. And so that is the, you can say, the advantage of this group exploration also. But it's not only the understanding which is being shared, but it is also the interest, the psychological energy that also gets shared. And therefore, maybe the exploration becomes more powerful, easier as a group than just done separately as an individual.
How do one know about what is exploring the teaching or explaining the teaching intellectually?
No, I don't think there is a need to. No, I don't think you see, if you want to make a difference between explanation and communication, and then you want to find out what is that difference, I think that is quite an artificial activity. If you understand what is explanation, what is its place, where it is relevant, where it is not relevant, then it is finished. If you understand what is communication, then that is finished. And we have already said that communication means the psychological communication. Explanation is the intellectual part, intellectual explanation. So we have already made a distinction. So there is no further need to differentiate it again. Yeah, go ahead.
So you mentioned that truth is living and moving.
Bit louder.
Truth is living and moving. So any path to that. So can you explain the truth living and moving? How is it?
Now, if you consider truth as life itself, right? Now, life itself is living, moving, cannot be stationary, right? It's, I mean, when do you consider something as alive? When it is moving, when it is interacting, right? If nothing is moving, probably you don't consider it as alive. Say your pet stops moving, it is already dead. That is how you recognize, or maybe, why is he not moving, all this thing, and you examine and you find it is dead. So dead things don't move, there is no movement. While life is the movement, is moving. And truth is nothing but the life. Because life, which is living quality, that is all that is there to existence. Existence is not dead, inanimate existence. The existence is the living quality, that which is living. And that which is living can never be dead.
We are made to believe that the truth is something unchangeable.
Why do you say truth is unchangeable? There is such a thing.
That's how we perceive. Actually,
Okay, we may perceive, but I think maybe that's not correct, in the sense, if truth is living, truth is moving, then how do you say it is not changeable? But it's not that today this is truth and tomorrow that is truth. It's not like that. You see, you have to make a distinction between the fact and the truth. And if we judge truth on the basis of this our physical experience, then that mistake is possible, where you can say that truth has to be changeless. Only then it is truth, or only then it is permanent. And anything changing is not permanent. But we don't have to look at truth in terms of these physical parameters. So what we have said is, truth is life itself, nothing different from life itself. And if you consider what is life itself, now if you consider life in terms of the various forms through which it expresses, right, then you are again explaining it in terms of the physical. But without the forms also, is there life? Is there living quality? So which means that the life which is unmanifest. So if you go on even logically exploring in that direction, you will find that ultimately you reach a position where you can only say that life is that living quality. Living, not something living. Once you say something, then the form comes into picture. But life is living itself, that living. So living is moving.
So it has got nothing to do with scientific truth. Nothing to do with scientific truth or something.
No, scientific truth, science talks about the logical truth. You have the truth table, no? True, 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 false, 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 right? We have that table. So that's the logical truth. So that is what science talks about. But Krishnamurti is not talking about that truth. He is talking about the truth of life, which is quite different. Unfortunately, he has to use that same word, truth, which is used also in a logical sense. But he is talking about completely different kind of truth. Yeah. Yeah, please Vipulav, go ahead. Yeah.
Dwelling in illusions for a long time, is it doing any harm to our brain cells?
Yes, it does. Our brain cells, then they become limited, they become stagnant and unable to see the facts. So, life of illusion is a life which is non-factual, and therefore understanding is not possible in that case. And such a person, whatever he does, he mostly always goes wrong. I mean, just to show you, now observer is separate from observed, is an illusion, and we are all living in that illusion. How is it affecting our brain? We are not able to resolve any human problem. In the resolution of one problem, we are creating another problem. And our life is then always full of problems. Problems in every aspect of life. Problems in relationship, political problems, social problems, religious problems, economic problems. It's all full of problems. And no problem has been completely solved. And in the solution of one problem, another problem arises. Then you are again busy in solving that. And so we are never free of problems. And how can we be free of problems as long as we are living in that illusion that observer is different from observed?
Are we accustomed to illusions or habituated to illusion?
Yeah, probably, maybe we are habituated to live a life of illusion, or I think more correctly, we don't even realize that we are living in illusion. That is the major point.
His first statement is wrong, sir. Dwelling long time in illusion.
Yeah,
It is a wrong statement. Because you are living in illusion.
yeah.
Isn't it, sir?
Completely.
No, you see, when you say I am living in illusion, right, that means you recognize that whatever way you are living is an illusion, right? Now, when you see it as an illusion, are you still in illusion? Right? So, which means that maybe I am not seeing that I am living in illusion, maybe I am only thinking that I am living in illusion. So, it is just a conclusion. right? And a conclusion, I think, doesn't have much reality, in the sense that it is just a conclusion, may not be true. So I may say, based on whatever, that yes, I am living in illusion, right? But that is only a thought, it's only a conclusion. It's not the actual observation. If it is the actual observation that I am living in illusion, then I am no longer in illusion. Again, example, take this example of the famous example of a rope and snake. Right? Mistaking a rope as a snake, right? Now, as long as that snake is a reality, right, I don't know that I am in illusion. Rope is there, I am taking that rope as snake. I don't know it is a rope. I am only seeing it as a snake. So snake is a reality for me. And when I see snake, I don't say I am in illusion. Right?
You
I
have
don't,
fear.
yeah, fear or whatever it is. I don't say I am in illusion. I say it's a snake. It's only when I find out that it's not actually snake, it's a rope. I mean, maybe the circumstances have changed, maybe there is more light now, or I am able to look at it more closely, and I come to know that it is a rope. So the moment I come to know that it is a rope, then it is a snake becomes an illusion. And therefore I say that it was an illusion that this is a snake. So you are able to say that it is an illusion only when you come out of illusion. As long as you are still in illusion, you are not able to say that you are in illusion.
No illusion is that it's higher and illusion and illusion.
Yeah.
So in the psychological domain, what is it? Observer or observer? Because here one need to be separate in physical sense to see the illusion.
Observer is not an illusion, observed is not an illusion. To consider that they are separate is the illusion.
Then the center,
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, we say obviously the center is a virtual center, it is illusory one. We assume it the center is a thinker and
No, I mean, you have in optics, you have real image and virtual image, right? The real image actually exists, the virtual image actually doesn't exist, but it appears to exist, right? And in experiments in optics, you have you differentiate between the virtual image and the real image, and you list the points of differences between the two, and you say that the real image you can take on the screen, but the virtual image you cannot take on the screen, it only appears. And so the virtual image is only an appearance of the image. The real image is the actual image which can be photographed.
While talking about the mirror image, where it is a virtual image,
Yes.
and it is left to right, it is also
Yes.
status.
It's a virtual image.
Also enhanced and diminished.
Yeah. Image can be enhanced, it could be diminished, all kinds of things can be done.
There is a check possible there, but what is the real in us? To see this is real and this is illusory. In my content.
No, now you have to test, you have to experiment with it to find out. Like say, how do you find out whether the image is real or virtual? How do you find out?
Suppose that one step after that one step, if it is likened to the quantum jump of an electron, suppose.
If it is likened to true.
the quantum jump of an electron potential where it is crossing. The probability of the crossing is very, very less. Is it? So, the people crossing that are taking that step, naturally it seems to be very remote.
No, I mean, we don't have to bring in that. I mean, it is not required to understand this illusion and not illusion. That is required for the mutation, for the change, how the energy, because you said mutation is a quantum jump, and for quantum jump you need energy. And person having no energy naturally cannot take quantum jump, and so mutation is not possible for such a person. So that's a different issue. But we are now talking about the illusion, and we are saying that it's only when you are outside the illusion, you are out of illusion, then you can say that it was an illusion. As long as you are within the illusion, you are not aware that it is an illusion. You are considering it as the fact, as the reality. It's only when it contradicts other facts in you, right, then you start becoming doubtful, right? For example, you are looking at it as a snake, and you are looking at it for a long time, and it is not moving at all. And therefore, it is contradicting another fact in you that a living thing moves, and this is not moving. And so maybe whether it is really snake. So then the doubt will start coming, right? So there are ways to find out whether it is an illusion or whether it is a fact. So in the same way, observer is separate from observed. If it is an illusion, it should contradict or not conform with some other established facts in you. So now you have to find out whether there are any such things in you on the basis of which you can say that yes, maybe this is an illusion.
Is it conflict which makes us see the illusion clear? Illusion. There is a conflict in me.
You will say the conflict is because of the division, right? And if conflict is actually there, then you will say the division is also actually there.
Yes.
So observer is separate from observed. So you have to find out.
Even tremendous work, sir. Like you have been doing this work for 25 years. All this also requires tremendous time, work, and energy and all this. Because is one part of it.
Yes, sir.
One place he says you need more energy than air.
Yes.
For the infinite energy also he uses.
The other is one has to give kind of thing. The importance which you food, clothes, and food, sex and sex.
See, you need to give time. You need to give energy, right? You need to give all your resources that are possible to find out.
Interest also is sustained
Yeah,
for a long time.
yeah. The interest is the energy. Energy is the
Along with illusion, there are paradoxes also in Krishnaji teachings. For example, in problems, Krishnaji says mind has to be free of problem to solve the problems.
Yes.
So please, can you say something
Yeah,
about this?
there are many such
Interesting paradoxes. We have seen also in illusions. This paradox also.
In fact, he says that one who says he knows does not
Doesn't know.
That also. There are so many such statements, and like God has not created man, but the man has created God. Exactly the opposite. Yeah. Yes.
Because he creates his own item.
Yeah.
He knows, the shape and color.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
starts worshiping.
Yeah.
There's no paradox there.
Yes.
There's reality that's happening there.
I mean, it goes quite contrary. In fact, he is, I think in Brockwood Park, he said in one of the dialogues that God is an illusion. And there was one of the parents who was also attending that talk, and he was a very pious Christian parent. And he said, oh, I don't want to educate my child in a school where they consider God as an illusion. So he withdrew his child and put him in some other school. So that also happens. But now coming back to your question. Yeah, a brain which is full of problem cannot solve any problem. And for the brain to be able to solve a problem, he has to be completely free from problem. And if the brain is completely free from problem, then what problem he has to solve? Yes. So that is the paradox.
Right? Thought itself is a problem, he tells again.
Yes.
We should identify that there is a problem. That is a problem. As long as it doesn't identify, then there won't be any problem, though he is there in the problem.
No, I mean, no, it goes much beyond. I mean, problem is not something conceived or something designed, but actually Krishnaji defines problem as something thrown at you. Something thrown at you is the problem. And what is thrown at you is the situation, right? Now, there is a situation that in certain region there isn't sufficient food. People are dying of hunger, right? Now, to say that because if I don't see that situation, then there is no problem for me. Maybe for me there is no problem. I don't see the situation. But that doesn't mean that there is no problem. It only means that I am not aware of that problem. Problems are there, but I am not aware for whatever reasons. Right? So, if problem is something thrown at you, right? Now, a brain which is constantly throwing things at itself, which is a brain which is full of problems. Now, can the brain stop that activity? A brain, right, because if problem is something thrown at you, right, and a brain is constantly throwing things at itself, which it considers as a problem, right, then naturally such a brain is full of problem. Now, can the brain stop throwing those things at itself? So, it has to find out why it is throwing. Maybe it's a good occupation for the brain. Otherwise, it feels bored or they say, it thinks in a wrong way or whatever it is. So, one has to find out why one's brain is so busy, why it is spilling out problems after problems and all those things. And if all that thing is sorted out, then the brain is quiet. And when the brain is quiet, only then it can respond rightly to a situation thrown at it. That means only then it can solve the real problem, something which is thrown at it from outside. Now that it can solve if it is quiet.
A person living in illusion is considering it as a true. How can he come out from the illusion?
Yeah, exactly. So that is what we explain. I mean, a person in illusion, he considers illusion as a fact. It doesn't occur to him as an illusion, right? So that is where we said that that thing is not the only fact in the life of that person. There may be many other facts which he has verified on all this thing. So, if he finds that the other facts do not match with this fact, or other facts they contradict this fact, then naturally he starts doubting whether this is fact at all. I mean, I give you an example, the rope and the snake. He has mistaken the rope as the snake. but then he further observes, right? And in the further observation, he finds that that object is not moving at all. And the other fact in him is that a living thing moves. So a living thing moves is an established fact in him. This thing doesn't move, that means doesn't confirm with that fact, and therefore this is likely that it may not be alive. So either it is a dead snake or it is not snake at all. So that way he can come out of the illusion.
With the visible example, it is clear.
Yes.
But invisible illusions in
Now if the illusion is invisible, how are you able to say that it is there? You have not seen it.
explanation regarding snake and
No, but what other illusion you are talking about?
Give an example. Imagination.
Anger, is anger illusion? Is anger illusion or it is a fact? I am angry. Is that an illusion or is that a fact?
So, can we say violence?
When it is gone, it could be illusion.
No, not necessary, because the repercussions, the consequences of that anger can still remain. Right? Then I cannot say that it was an illusion.
So the living quality we were talking about, discussing about, is that the truth of life? The truth, the living quality.
The living quality. The living quality itself is the truth. Yeah. We said truth is life itself.
So, taking an example of violence and non-violence is illusion, and we said that movement from violence to non-violence is an illusion.
No, non-violence is a non-fact.
Non-fact.
Yeah, it's not a fact. It's only an idea, right? And violence is the fact. Now the process of becoming non-violent from violence is actually illusion. Actually it is illusion because you are not becoming non-violent. You are still remaining violent, but it only appears that you are becoming non-violent, and therefore it is an illusion. But for the person who is trying to become that, for him it is not an illusion, because he says that I am actually feeling that I am becoming that, right? Therefore it is not an illusion for him. For him it is a fact. It's only when he realizes that after trying for years and years, right, maybe 20 years, 30 years, he gets exhausted and finds that this process of becoming has not led him anywhere, right? Maybe then he will consider that after all it was an illusion, not a fact.
So in the day-to-day living, we have to take certain action. Simple things like choice in clothes, what we wear, and travel. In those actions, how does choices awareness help? How does it lead to the right action?
I mean, Krishnamurti says that at the physical level, the choice has a place, because you want to choose between two cars or two mobiles or two kinds of clothes, whatever you want to buy and all these things. So there the choice is valid. And even in the field of appointment, you are trying to appoint somebody for certain function, certain work, then you have to select from several candidates and take the best suited for that work or that position. And so you compare and you have a choice and so on.
So in the physical world, we can.
Physical world, yes, the choice has a place, yeah. But in the psychological realm, there is no choice. In the sense that you cannot say that first I will get rid of anger, then I will get rid of fear, and then, because they may not happen in that sequence. So there, whatever happens, that you have to confront, that you have to face, and there is no choice. I mean, but there are situations when you have to exercise preference. I mean, still I won't call it as a psychological choice. When, for example, say in a teacher's life, a teacher was called by the principal and was fired in the sense scolded and all those things, and his work criticized and all those things. So the teacher is in a very disturbed state of mind, right? Now actually he should watch his state of mind and get it settled, be quiet, and then enter his classroom, right? Only then he can carry out whatever teaching he has to carry out academically in the classroom. But if he is in a disturbed state of mind, he can't do that. So either he has to take off from the class, which is not possible because the principal won't allow him. So he has to take the class. Now if he goes with that disturbed state of mind into the classroom, the students are very quick to notice it. And they will say, yes, teacher is not in the mood today, right? And so they will try to take the control of the class. So all these things are there. So the teacher has to learn that at least for the time being, he should be able to put aside his state of mind. You can say to yourself, well, I am disturbed, but let me be quiet, let me be composed, at least for next 1 hour. And I will put aside, so I will not think about this matter at all. It has been put in the shelf, locked, and then I enter as if nothing has happened. I carry out my work of teaching, and then when I am free and in my own private space, then I can let all that come out, and then I can observe and so on. So in this way, I think the approach is also possible. So there again, maybe if you can regard it as a choice, right? But you have chosen for the sake of carrying out the work at the physical level. If physical thing was not involved, then maybe you don't have to do that. If you don't have to take any class and you are disturbed, you can straight away go to your room and be all by yourself and sort it out, whatever way.
So that kind of led to the right action.
Yes.
That point,
Yes.
That was the right action
Yes.
to do. So that's why that awareness was there to
Yes.
hold the content
Yes.
kept aside.
So that awareness has to be there, without which, I mean, one needs to observe what is the requirement of the situation. The situation demands something, and if you are able to identify that demand, then you are in a position to take a right action vis-a-vis that situation. Otherwise, not.
We are really in control of emotions.
Yes, yes, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So the time is over. Yeah, 1:30. Yeah.